Inside a dim cavern, the steady clang of metal against stone echoed through the darkness. A white-haired young man suddenly froze mid-swing when he noticed faint blue droplets seeping through a crack in the ceiling. His breath caught as excitement lit up his eyes. At last, he had found what he was searching for. Carefully, he held up a glass bottle and let the glowing liquid drip inside, recognizing it immediately as ink. He glanced at the small black cat perched on his shoulder and offered a quiet thanks. Without Nero's help, this discovery would never have been possible. Turning toward the pale light at the cave's entrance, he thought about what this ink could mean. If he brought it back, maybe the pioneering corps would finally acknowledge him. With that hope in mind, he exited the cave and stepped onto a bleak gray wasteland. Far in the distance stood a dazzling city, radiant and alive. Within its shining walls, cheers erupted as elite warriors known as colorists made their entrance, their vividly colored hair marking them as heroes. Nearby citizens spoke with admiration, praising the team for slaying yet another giant monster. As long as these warriors existed, they believed, the city would remain protected. The atmosphere shifted abruptly to the Shadow District, where dim streets replaced bright towers. A line of applicants waited outside a building, a notice board declaring the entrance exam for the C-rank Pioneering Corps and stating that anyone with color could apply. Suddenly, the white-haired young man was hurled out of the building, crashing hard onto the ground. Two examiners stood above him. One shouted that someone like him had no place there. Gritting his teeth, the young man pushed himself up and held out the bottle of blue ink, demanding an explanation. He insisted that this ink proved his worth. The examiner sneered and pointed at him, spelling out the truth without mercy. He was rejected because he was colorless. In this world, he explained mockingly, one's role was fixed at birth, and the boy had no right to challenge it. The red-haired examiner released a pulse of crimson energy, cursing him as a worthless colorless. The force slammed into the young man, forcing a painful groan from his lips as he collapsed to one knee. From the top of the stairs, the examiner continued his lecture. With a look of absolute arrogance, he claimed that only people chosen like himself could ever become pioneers. Beyond the city lay the Black Lands, he said, a nightmare realm where the weak were devoured by darkness and savage creatures. Only true pioneers dared to explore those lands, gathering resources and fighting monsters so humanity could survive. They were heroes, and the boy before him could never be one. Returning to the present, the examiner's voice turned cold. For someone without color, achieving greatness was impossible. He ordered the boy to accept his place, to stick to lowly labor and never return. With a final threat promising death if he disobeyed, the door slammed shut. Left alone, the young man lowered his head. A soft rustling came from inside his coat as Nero peeked out, blinking curiously. The boy stroked the cat's head and spoke gently, saying they could try another place. He was used to rejection by now. Even so, he forced a small, stubborn smile and whispered a promise to Nero and himself that he would one day become the greatest colorist. Quickly, he tucked the cat back inside, wary of being seen. He wandered through the industrial streets, unsure where to go next. Quietly hopping, there was somewhere that would accept them. What he didn't realize was that a green-haired man was watching him from above. Later, in a crowded plaza, the young man flipped through a worn notebook. With a frustrated sigh, he crossed out yet another location. Every page was filled with rejection. Exhausted, he stared at the list, finally admitting defeat. With no better option left, he stopped in front of a modest building marked Mari Workshop. Muttering that he had no choice, he pushed the door open and called out. Inside, a white-haired girl wearing goggles looked up and greeted him with a bright smile, pushing her glasses up her nose. She immediately noticed his gloomy mood and guessed the outcome. As Nero jumped onto the table, she happily greeted the cat as well. Trying to lift his spirits, she insisted the examiners were blind to his talent. The young man shook his head, asking what talent mattered when no one would ever accept a colorless person. Mari countered that the fact he repeatedly survived the Black Lands and brought back resources was proof enough. He replied modestly, saying he only managed it because Nero helped him. Changing topics, he set the bottle of blue ink on the table and asked if she wanted to buy it. Mari's eyes sparkled as she agreed immediately, offering a generous price. She poured the ink into a connected pipe system, grumbling about how expensive ink had become due to shortages. The young man commented that this scarcity was exactly why people were calling for more pioneers. A glance at the machinery made it clear that the city's life depended on these vibrant fluids. Annoyed by the unfairness of it all, Mari asked if he had reconsidered her earlier suggestion. When he hesitated, She slammed a flyer onto the table and snapped that he couldn't afford to be picky. The paper advertised recruitment for the S-Rank Dawn Pioneering Corps, boldly stating that their entrance test was open to everyone and judged purely on skill. The young man stared at the notice, stunned. He admitted he had always avoided applying, convinced he would fail. Could a corps like that really acknowledge his ability? Mari urged him to try, insisting that if the test truly measured skill alone, this might be his chance. She smiled warmly, reminding him that becoming a colorist had always been his dream. A memory surfaced, him as a child, alone in the rain, clutching Nero tightly. That dream had never faded. Mari promised she would support him no matter what. Strengthened by her faith, the young man smiled at last. Gripping the flyer firmly, he decided he would hesitate no longer. He waved goodbye to Mari and stepped out of the workshop, resolve burning brighter than ever. Moving through the silent backstreets of the Shadow District, the protagonist held the recruitment flyer tightly, reminding himself that he needed to prepare carefully for the upcoming test. Without warning, he stopped. Nero suddenly stiffened inside his clothes, reacting to something behind them. A calm voice echoed from the darkness, casually asking what was wrong. At the same moment, a hand emerged from the shadows, gripping a wooden staff crowned with a glowing green crystal. The green-haired man who had been observing him stepped forward, raising the wand as a magical targeting sigil locked onto the protagonist. Back. The attack came instantly. A sharp blade of green energy shot forward. The protagonist spun around in alarm, but his reaction was too slow. The spell struck him squarely, tearing through his body and forcing a scream of pain from his throat as he collapsed onto the stone ground. The green-haired man approached with his companion, looking down at him without emotion. He mocked the boy, remarking that although he had narrowly avoided an instant death, it made no difference. He would die soon regardless. Blood pooled beneath the protagonist as he lay helpless, listening as the man coldly stated that the death of a colorless person would never matter to anyone. With fatting strength, the protagonist whispered for Nero. Seeing the cat's frightened face peeking from his clothes, he forced himself to move just enough to urge Nero to run away, using the last of his energy to protect him. The scene shifted to an industrial zone marked with warning signs for ink waste disposal. Groaning, the protagonist slowly regained consciousness, only to find the green-haired man looming over him with a twisted smile. He was lifted by the collar and dangled over a vast pit filled with thick, black sludge. The attacker laughed cruelly, saying it was unfortunate to be thrown in while still breathing. He explained that the pit contained discarded ink waste, a corrosive substance that dissolved anything it touched, leaving no trace behind. Panicking, the protagonist struggled weakly and demanded to know who this man was and why he had been targeted. The green-haired man revealed that earlier, while spying on him, they had been shocked, not by the boy himself, but by what he was hiding. A brief memory surfaced, showing the two observers focusing their attention on the creature concealed inside his jacket. The man explained that a being intelligent enough to bond with a human was extraordinarily rare. Calling the cat a priceless discovery, he tightened his grip on the protagonist's throat. Behind him, his assistant raised a small cage. Inside it, Nero cried out in distress. Horror washed over the protagonist as he realized his companion had already been captured. In desperation, the protagonist grabbed the man's collar and screamed for him to release the cat. The attacker barely reacted. Scoffing at the boy's fury, his eyes shining with greed, he declared that such a valuable creature was wasted on a colorless owner. Nero would fetch an enormous price on the black market. With ease, the man overpowered him, lifting him off the ground while choking him, sneering that the pet deserved a far better master. Dangling helplessly, the protagonist cursed himself for lowering his guard in the Shadow District. Memories of a lonely past filled his mind. He had endured rejection and discrimination his entire life, but losing Nero was something he refused to accept. Nero was his only family. A surge of rage erupted within him. He warned the man not to underestimate him and clamped down on the attacker's arm with all his remaining strength. The green-haired man suddenly froze. His expression twisted from arrogance to alarm as strange energy crackled across his face. A swirling green aura was forcibly drawn out of his body, flowing into the protagonist's hands. The man screamed in terror, overwhelmed by the sensation of something being ripped away from him. Panicked, he violently shook the boy loose and hurled him backward into the vat of toxic ink waste. Calling the encounter a waste of time, the attackers turned away. Nero cried desperately from within the cage as they declared their newfound wealth and left for the black market, ignoring the cat's cries entirely. Sinking beneath the dark liquid, the protagonist watched the light fade away. Nero's voice grew distant as he tried to move, but his body refused to respond. Memories flashed through his mind, and he wondered if this was where his story would end. Then he saw a vision of himself as a child, clutching the cat tightly. He realized he could not die, not yet. There was still a promise he had to fulfill. In an endless void, a mysterious voice echoed, demanding to know why he was doing nothing. Confused, the protagonist asked who was speaking. Massive words appeared before him, commanding him to accept it. Thoughts flooded his mind, urging him to save Nero and reclaim his true color. The voice demanded that he take back what belonged to him. From a swirling mass of black liquid, a hand reached out. The protagonist stood still as tendrils of darkness wrapped around him. He looked down at his hands, now engulfed in shadow, realizing he was no longer submerged in the ink. His memories felt fractured, but he pushed them aside. What mattered now was clear. His form became a silhouette of darkness, white eyes glowing faintly. He questioned what he had turned into. A soft cry broke through the silence. Looking up, he saw two blurred figures standing above, holding a small cage. Inside it, Nero cried out. The sound snapped him back to himself. Whatever he had become, one truth remained unchanged. He had to save Nero. He extended a shadow-covered hand toward the men. Suddenly, a colossal eruption of black energy surged upward from the depths. The green-haired man and his assistant recoiled in terror, screaming as they stumbled backward. Peering into the pit, they were horrified to find the ink waste completely gone. At the bottom stood a single dark figure, radiating an overwhelming, ominous presence as it slowly advanced toward them. The green-haired man trembled uncontrollably, his face drained of color. As a massive claw of shadow descended from above, he stammered in disbelief, wondering if the being before him was one of the dreaded creatures. The explosion left the Shadow District in complete ruin. Buildings were shattered, streets torn apart, and dark residue coated everything in sight. An elderly man screamed hysterically at a police officer, insisting he had seen a small hand appear out of nowhere, followed by an eruption of black energy that devastated the entire area in an instant. As the dust slowly settled, medics rushed in and carried away two unconscious bodies, the green-haired attacker and his assistant. A newly arrived pair observed the scene quietly. A red-haired man and a blue-haired woman looked down at the injured figures and noted that both were B-rank pioneers who had completely lost their color. The blue-haired woman frowned, unable to comprehend what kind of power could strip someone of their color entirely, while her companion urged her to stay focused on their task. The red-haired man explained that they had been dispatched after reports of a powerful creature manifesting inside the city. The nearby police officer stiffened in shock upon realizing he was speaking to high-ranking colorists. Nervously, he asked why elites of their level were operating in the Shadow District. The blue-haired woman answered calmly that they were conducting an investigation. When the red-haired man requested to see the impact site, the officer immediately led them forward. Standing at the edge of the massive crater, the red-haired man examined the debris, noticing dark stains embedded deep into the ground. His partner confirmed faint traces of a creature's presence. She pointed out how abnormal it was for such an entity to appear within city limits, especially so close to the outskirts, since only minor creatures ever slipped past the walls. Peering into the depths of the pit, the red-haired man speculated that this might be an entirely new variant. Though his expression appeared bored, his eyes were sharp. Tracking something that broke established patterns would not be easy. Far away, beyond the city, rubble lay scattered across a desolate landscape. In the darkness, a faint cry echoed. Lin groaned softly, his entire body aching as he lay hidden among the shadows. A rough, warm sensation brushed against his face. Slowly opening his eyes, he saw Nero licking his hair. Relief flooded through him. Without thinking, Lin pulled the black cat into a tight embrace, clutching him as if afraid he might disappear. Only then did the pain fully register, forcing a sharp wince from his lips. Sitting up with effort, Lin tried to piece together what had happened. He remembered the men who attacked him, remembered being thrown into the vat of black sludge, remembered sinking into the darkness. His breath caught as the realization hit. He was alive. Raising his hands, he stared at them in disbelief, struggling to understand how survival was even possible. When he touched his head, his fingers froze. His hair, once white, was now pitch black. Lin gripped it tightly, his mind reeling as confusion and disbelief overwhelmed him. Surrounded by absolute darkness, Lin slowly stood, realizing he couldn't see anything at all. Panic crept into his chest. He called out for Nero, his voice tense. In response, the cat leapt into the air and spun, releasing a brilliant white glow that illuminated their surroundings. The light revealed a horrifying sight. They were deep within a vast cavern, encircled by countless shadowy creatures lurking just beyond the light's edge. Lin stared in shock, his thoughts scrambling as he tried to understand where they were. Then it hit him. They were in the Black Lands. More specifically, the Black Forest, a place so dangerous that only B-rank pioneers were allowed to enter. As the monsters began to close in, Lin's heart raced. He shouted for Nero to stay close and bolted forward. The glowing cat flew beside him, lighting the way as they ran. A massive shadow serpent nearly crushed him, and Lin barely avoided it, shouting in alarm at how deadly the situation had become. Even so, he spared a breath to thank Nero for guiding him through the darkness. They climbed jagged cliffs, leapt across broken terrain, and finally dropped down a sheer vertical slope, putting distance between themselves and the pursuing horde. As Lin ran, something strange dawned on him. The fear in his expression slowly shifted into confusion. Dark energy pulsed faintly from his chest, and his body felt incredible. Despite the relentless sprint, he wasn't tired at all. He jumped across a massive gap with ease, landing smoothly on the other side. His eyes widened as he realized his speed, strength, and agility had far surpassed anything he had known before. Nero suddenly stiffened, his ears twitching. A split second later, a wolf-like shadow creature lunged from the darkness. Lin reacted too slowly. His stance was wrong. He knew instantly he couldn't block it. Certain death loomed, and he shut his eyes, bracing himself. The impact came, but not as expected. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the forest. Lin felt pressure on his arm, but no pain. Opening his eyes, he saw the creature recoil in terror. Its teeth had shattered upon biting him. The shadow wolf whimpered, backing away before fleeing into the darkness. Lin stared at his uninjured arm, stunned, his breath trembling as he realized something had fundamentally changed within him. Kay examined his arm carefully and froze. There was no wound, not even a mark. His breathing slowed as disbelief took hold. An attack that should have torn him apart had done nothing. Staring at his hands, he finally understood. This toughness, this overwhelming resilience, this was color, the very power he had been chasing his entire life. Before he could think further, the ground began to shake violently. Nero stiffened, ears snapping upright, and Kay followed the cat's gaze just as an enormous shadow rose from the darkness. A gigantic figure hauled itself over the ridge, its single glowing eye burning with hostility. Kay's blood ran cold as he recognized the creature. A cyclops. His mind raced, wondering why a monster that normally lived deep within the Black Forest had wandered this far out. The cyclops raised its massive arm and smashed it into the ground. The impact exploded outward, sending rocks and debris flying. Nero cried out, but Kay remained sitting amid the destruction. The blow had been heavy, far heavier than anything he had ever endured, but he was alive. More than that, a confident smile slowly spread across his face. For the first time, he realized he could actually win. Fragments of his past surged through his mind. Standing alone as a child, being rejected again and again, always told he didn't belong. He clenched his fist, acknowledging that he had finally grasped the strength he had dreamed of. Things would not stay the same anymore. Power surged through his arm as he tightened his grip. He straightened his back and planted his feet firmly into the ground, deciding he would not run again. Shadows gathered around him, drawn to the strange force awakening inside. In an instant, darkness swallowed his form, reshaping him into a being made entirely of shadow, his white eyes glowing intensely within the black silhouette. The Cyclops roared and lunged forward, reaching out to crush the small figure before it. Kay exploded off the ground, launching himself upward with terrifying force. He twisted midair and drove his fist forward. The punch landed. The Cyclops shattered. Its massive body disintegrated into fragments as a violent shockwave tore through the forest, flattening trees, and clearing the land in every direction. Kay flew through the air, surrounded by debris, still wrapped in shadow. Then something changed. The darkness peeled away from him without warning. His eyes widened as the world around him transformed. Bright sunlight poured down over a vibrant forest, waterfalls glistening below. Colors burst into view so vividly that it took his breath away. Just as suddenly, the power vanished. His hair turned white once more. Fear struck instantly. Gravity reclaimed him. Kay screamed as he fell, crashing violently into the forest below. He dragged himself free from the wreckage, Nero hovering anxiously above him. Kay dropped to his knees, gasping for breath as the remaining traces of shadow bled out of his body like smoke. Horror crept in as he felt it clearly now. His color was draining away. Panic tightened his chest. He understood the cost at last. The stronger the power he used, the faster it disappeared. If he kept going like this, he would be left completely helpless. The world suddenly went dark. A voice echoed deep within his mind, cold and commanding, asking why he was hesitating. It told him the prey was already before him and demanded that he consume it. Kay looked down at the scattered remains of the Cyclops. The voice pressed on, asking if he wanted to live, urging him to reach out his hand. Sweat rolled down his face as exhaustion threatened to pull him into unconsciousness. The voice continued, relentless. His vision blurred, his eyes faintly glowing as survival instinct took over. Trembling, Kay obeyed. He extended his hand and pressed it against the monster's remains. The moment he made contact, something activated. Dark energy surged outward as the shadow lingering within the Cyclops was forcibly drawn into him. Nero stared in stunned silence as a towering pillar of black light erupted from the forest, shooting straight into the sky. When the light finally faded, Kay collapsed against a rock, breathing heavily. The crushing exhaustion lifted, replaced by strength. His hair had turned black once again, his energy restored. He tilted his head back and stared at the sky, releasing a long breath of relief. He was alive, and for the first time he knew he was going to survive. Back at the Mari workshop, the atmosphere is calm and ordinary. Mari is bent over her workbench, studying a blueprint when the bell above the door rings softly. She looks up and freezes. A tall figure wrapped in a tattered cloak stands silently in the doorway, their face hidden beneath a deep hood. Forcing a polite smile, Mari greets the stranger, though her hands tremble slightly. She asks if they need something, but the figure offers no response, only radiating an unsettling presence. The cloaked stranger steps forward. Mari's unease grows into fear, and she points at him, blurting out that he looks extremely suspicious. When he keeps approaching, panic takes over. She snatches up a heavy wrench from the table and warns him loudly to stop, threatening to swing if he comes any closer. Suddenly, the figure lunges forward. Mari screams, squeezing her eyes shut as she braces for the worst. Instead of an attack, the figure stops short. A familiar voice tells her to relax. The hood is pulled back, revealing a face she knows all too well. Kay scratches the back of his head awkwardly and tells her it is really him, admitting that even he barely recognizes himself now. Mari lowers the wrench slowly, staring at him in disbelief. Her eyes widen, her mouth opens, and then she explodes into a loud scream, demanding to know what on earth happened to him. Still trembling, Mari clutches a metal pipe, her shock quickly turning into fury. She grabs another tool, shouting that whoever did this to him will pay dearly. Swinging the tools wildly, she yells that she will smash their heads in. Kay hurriedly steps in, waving his hands and insisting that he is fine, trying desperately to calm her down. Once it finally sinks in that Kay is truly standing in front of her, Mari sets the wrench aside. She exhales shakily and admits she panicked because she lost contact with him and feared the worst. Her anger fades into relief, and she smiles softly, telling him she is just glad he is alive. Kay apologizes quietly for worrying her. Inside, Kay can hardly believe his own situation. Falling into toxic ink, surviving, and awakening a color all sound absurd even to him. He voices one concern, pointing out that his color is black, something often associated with monsters, and wonders if others will look at him differently. After a moment, he shakes his head, deciding it doesn't matter. What matters is that he finally has a chance. He declares that he will head straight to the Pioneering Corps entrance exam and thanks Mari sincerely for everything she has done. He then awkwardly asks if he can borrow some clothes, promising to return them later. Mari sighs dramatically, asking how many times he plans to beg. Still, she smiles and waves it off, calling it an investment in a future colorist. Without warning, she grabs his hand and drags him along, announcing cheerfully that she has just the thing for him. Kay stumbles after her, completely caught off guard. The scene transitions to a massive Colosseum-like structure, where a crowd of hopeful pioneers steadily marches up wide stone steps. Inside, hundreds of candidates gather on a vast floor divided into large white square platforms, all waiting for the entrance exam to begin. Among them, 3 young men stand close together, whispering nervously. One of them, a blue-haired man wearing the number 183 on his chest, tries to reassure his anxious companion. The pink-haired friend can hardly believe they have made it this far, about to challenge the entrance test of the legendary S-rank Dawn Pioneering Corps. This corps is famous for its feats in the Black Lands and is seen as the city's greatest hope. Still, the candidates can't ignore how many powerful competitors are present. They point out a woman with long turquoise hair, rumored to be the daughter of a renowned color family, standing beside a man wearing a beanie. They also notice other promising figures, including a pink-haired boy with goggles and a man in a gas mask. Despite all this talent, they agree that one person stands out above the rest. Their eyes land on a young man with wild green hair and sharp, predatory eyes. This is Gale, known as the Gale Sword. Many believe his success is guaranteed, as rumors claim he can defeat dangerous creatures on his own. However, he is equally infamous for his violent temperament, which supposedly led to his expulsion from his previous corps. Laughing arrogantly, the blue-haired man with number 183 claims he isn't afraid of someone like Gale. A shadow suddenly looms behind him. Gale is standing there, expression cold, daring him to repeat himself. The blue-haired man stiffens, fear draining the color from his face. Gale looks down on them with open disdain, calling them pathetic children. With a bored sigh, Gale turns and walks away, muttering that the quality of competitors is laughably low for an S-rank exam. As his gaze sweeps over the crowd, he mentally dismisses nearly everyone, until he pauses. His eyes narrow as they settle on the turquoise-haired girl. He recognizes her immediately as Ellie Cayenne, the second daughter of the Cyan family. A smirk curls across his lips as he admits she is at least worth noticing. Imagining the upcoming test, Gale wonders with anticipation how the rest of them will react once it truly begins. A metallic speaker crackled sharply, cutting through the noise of the arena and demanding everyone's attention. Gale and Ellie both turned toward the stage as the announcement rang out, declaring that the entrance examination for the Dawn Pioneering Corps had officially begun. Standing atop the podium was a man with striking blonde hair and sharp yellow eyes. He calmly announced that the test would start immediately. A wave of gasps swept through the candidates as they recognized him. He was a renowned colorist from the Dawn Corps, a hero who had played a major role in a recent large-scale creature extermination. Excited whispers spread through the crowd. If someone of his stature had personally come to oversee the exam, it meant the Corps was taking this recruitment extremely seriously. The pressure radiating from him alone made it clear that S-rank pioneers existed on an entirely different level. The examiner scanned the crowd and welcomed them briefly. He acknowledged that everyone present had their own reasons for applying, wealth, influence, glory, or a sense of duty, but stated flatly that none of that truly mattered. His gaze sharpened as he explained that, in the end, only strength decided a person's worth. The Dawn Corps sought individuals powerful enough to step into the Black Lands and reclaim territory for humanity. Mediocrity, he said coldly, had no place here. With a sweep of his arm, he pointed toward the large square platform spread across the arena floor. The first test, he announced, would be a tournament. Combat ability was the foundation of a pioneer's survival, because the world beyond the city walls was merciless. Only those who could fight would live. He ordered the candidates to demonstrate their power and instructed them to step forward when their numbers were called. Advancement would be decided solely by victory. The speaker rang out again, calling the first pair, number 126 and number 286. Gale, bearing the number 126, stepped onto the stage with a grim expression. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many recognized him instantly and pitied whoever had drawn him as an opponent so early. Gale, on the other hand, grinned sharply. He welcomed the opportunity, thinking it was fortunate to have entertainment right away after being bored for so long. His eyes gleamed as he wondered how thoroughly he should crush his opponent. That was when he noticed the other contestant approaching. A cloaked figure wearing number 286 walked forward silently. Gale frowned, finding the sight unsettling. From his perspective, the man's posture looked awkward and unimpressive, almost clumsy. Deciding words were unnecessary, Gale wrapped his hand around his sword hilt. With a sharp metallic ring, he drew the blade and released his power without restraint. Green currents of wind burst outward as he swung, filling the air with cutting pressure. Spectators watched in awe as multiple glowing blades of wind formed around him. Whispers erupted, praising his mastery. Even at his age, he was already wielding advanced techniques, truly deserving of the title Gale Sword. Gale locked his gaze onto the cloaked opponent and taunted him silently, daring him to defend. Stomping the ground, He gathered explosive momentum and surged forward, enveloped in a raging vortex of wind. The force of his charge alone seemed capable of tearing flesh apart. The hooded figure did not move. As Gale leapt into the air and brought his blade crashing down with a roar, the cloaked man stepped in calmly and threw a single left punch. The sound of impact echoed through the arena. Gale's body was hurled backward like a broken doll. Screams erupted from the stands as he smashed into the far wall, cracks spreading outward in a web-like pattern. His body slumped forward, completely unconscious. The match had ended in one strike. Silence fell. The hooded fighter lowered his arm and flexed his wrist slightly, muttering that the sudden burst of movement had startled even him. His hood slipped back, revealing messy black hair. This was Kay. Before anyone could process the outcome, a spectator suddenly screamed and pointed at Kay, not at the defeated Gale, but at the energy surrounding him. It was black. The blonde examiner narrowed his eyes, his expression turning grave. That color was identical to the energy wielded by creatures. Even Ellie Cayenne stood frozen in shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. A human wielding black color, was that even possible? Kay stood alone at the center of the arena, completely unaware of the storm he had just unleashed. Murmurs spread rapidly as people whispered that perhaps the reason the Gale's sword had fallen in one blow was this strange, ominous power. Kay looked around nervously at the staring crowd, confused by their reactions, and wondered quietly if he had done something wrong. The tournament pressed on with one fierce clash after another. In one battle, a shaking candidate desperately hurled razor-sharp stones through the air, but Kay surged forward without hesitation. He slipped between the attacks with ease, closed the gap in an instant, and drove his fist straight into the opponent's chest. The mage was sent flying across the arena, knocked unconscious before he even hit the ground. The announcer quickly declared Kay the victor. The pattern repeated itself. Another challenger was smashed into the floor with overwhelming force, while a third barely had time to react before being knocked out cold. Kay's victories were swift, brutal, and absolute. High above the arena, the blonde examiner watched closely, his interest growing by the second. He openly declared that Kay was the most outstanding applicant by far. With clear excitement, he remarked that this was the first recorded black holder and insisted that the Corps had to secure him immediately, before word spread beyond control. At that moment, slow, heavy footsteps echoed nearby. A relaxed voice commented that it seemed like a busy day. The blonde examiner turned sharply and froze when he saw who had arrived, the red-haired man and the blue-haired woman from the explosion investigation. Surprised, he asked why Team Leader Red was present. The red-haired man waved it off casually, saying they were merely passing through. They briefly exchanged words about the investigation into the strange creature incident. The red-haired leader sighed, admitting there had been no real progress. He then shifted the topic, asking if there were any promising candidates. The examiner mentioned the young woman from the Cayenne family and added that there was one exceptionally unusual participant. Suddenly, the red-haired leader's expression changed. His eyes locked onto the arena as he sensed something familiar. He spotted Kay immediately, his gaze narrowing at the black energy surrounding the boy. As the examiner continued praising Kay, the red-haired man remained silent, studying him carefully. The blue-haired woman leaned closer and whispered, asking if the boy could be related to their investigation. The leader confirmed it was very likely. A new color emerging right after the Shadow District incident was far too suspicious to ignore. He decided to observe Kay closely for now. Completely unaware of the attention, Kay stared at his clenched fist, dark energy curling around it like smoke. Excitement filled him as he realized that becoming a pioneer was finally within reach. Still, he remembered the severe strain his transformation caused and warned himself not to push too far. If his power vanished mid-battle, he would be utterly helpless. Suddenly, an overwhelming wave of freezing air swept across the arena. A towering wall of ice formed instantly. Standing calmly within the mist was Ellie Cayenne. The announcer declared number 17 the winner, revealing that her opponent had been frozen solid in a block of ice. The spectators erupted into chatter, marveling at the overwhelming strength of the Cayenne family's color. Kay watched in awe, wondering how anyone could stand against magic like that. As Ellie descended the stairs, she passed Kay and stopped. Her sharp blue eyes locked onto him, studying him with clear suspicion. Without saying a word, she turned away and continued on, leaving Kay unsettled and confused. The announcer announced that the first examination had ended. The blonde examiner stepped forward, thanking everyone for their efforts. Due to time constraints, he explained, they would proceed directly to the next test. The eliminated candidates were ordered to leave, many doing so with defeated expressions. As the examiner began to explain the second test, a hand landed firmly on his shoulder. The red-haired man stepped forward with a confident smile and took over. He announced that the next examination would be personally conducted by him. The remaining candidates stared in shock, immediately recognizing Colorless Red, one of the Shining City's strongest warriors. Fear spread through the crowd. His reputation was infamous. Rumors claimed his power was so destructive that even allies kept their distance, and that whenever he led an exam, no one survived it. The blonde examiner hesitated, warning him that changing the test format would anger the captain. Red laughed it off, saying he was used to being scolded. He declared the test simple: endure. Flames erupted from his body in an instant. A massive wave of fire rolled forward, forming individual spheres around each candidate, trapping them inside blazing prisons. Panic erupted as the heat surged. Red explained calmly that he had recreated the environment of a certain region in the Black Lands and added that it would get rather warm. He dismissed the flames as nothing more than a heated stove, reminding them that the real Black Lands were far worse. If they endured, they passed. If not, they never deserved to become pioneers. Inside the fire barriers, screams echoed. Some candidates pounded helplessly at the walls, realizing escape was impossible. Others trembled in terror, wondering what kind of hell existed beyond the city if this was considered mild. Watching from the sidelines, the blonde examiner noted with awe that Red's control was as precise as ever, capable of restraining so many people simultaneously. A sharp cracking sound suddenly cut through the air. Red and his assistant turned just in time to see one fire sphere turn blue before shattering completely. Ice exploded outward as Ellie Cayenne stepped free, standing tall amid the frozen shards. Red acknowledged her calmly, nodding that it was impressive. While ice naturally countered fire, his power usually overwhelmed such advantages. After a moment of consideration, he admitted she truly deserved to be called a prodigy. His attention then shifted to the other candidate of interest. Inside another fire sphere, Kay stood perfectly still. Red observed him briefly, unimpressed, assuming the boy wouldn't last much longer. Inside the barrier, however, Kay was panicking. He realized he had used too much of his power earlier. His black energy was leaking rapidly, draining faster under the intense heat. A horrifying thought struck him. If his color vanished here, he would be exposed as colorless and likely become an experiment. Desperation set in. His gaze locked onto the raging fire around him. A reckless idea formed. Since the barrier itself was created by color, he wondered if it could be absorbed. He didn't know the limits of his ability, but he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he pressed his hand against the wall of flames. Instantly, the fire warped violently. Shock ran through Kay as he realized it was working. A massive vortex of black energy erupted from his body, tearing the red flames apart and dragging them into his hand. Nearby candidates screamed in disbelief. From the podium, both Red and the blonde examiner stared down in stunned silence. Red broke into a tense smile, sweat forming on his brow, and muttered that they had just discovered a truly dangerous lunatic. Kay stood at the center of the arena as the remaining energy slowly faded away. Red and black power still lingered around his hands, twisting together in a frightening display. The crowd had fallen completely silent, yet inside, Kay was anything but calm. His heart was racing and panic clawed at his chest. He forced an awkward smile, thinking bitterly that this was not how things were supposed to go. Instead of blending in, he had drawn far too much attention to himself. Ellie Cayenne remained motionless, staring at him as if the world had frozen. For a moment, she wondered whether her eyes were deceiving her. Black was that truly a color a human could wield? The idea unsettled her deeply. Anxiety crept into her chest as she observed the young man wrapped in unfamiliar darkness. Years of pressure and expectation surged through her mind, and unwillingly she acknowledged the truth. He was strong. Strong enough that even if she fought at full power, victory would not be guaranteed. As Kay walked away, Ellie felt a chill. There was something about him that went beyond raw strength. Shaking her head, she tried to push those unsettling thoughts aside. Colorless Red casually slung an arm over Kay's shoulder, as if they were old acquaintances. With a relaxed grin, he told him that things would not be so easy next time. He remarked that the way K's black power swallowed everything was fascinating, and he could not suppress his curiosity. Suggesting they talk somewhere private, Red guided K away, claiming it was for K's own protection, though his eyes clearly said otherwise. K, sweating profusely, nervously asked about the exam. Red laughed and told him it was obvious he had passed. Hearing that, K froze. The realization hit him hard. His reckless display had actually secured his dream. Emotion welled up inside him as he finally accepted that he had become a pioneer. From behind them, the blonde examiner shouted angrily at Red for interfering without permission. Red waved it off, laughing and asking for forgiveness just this once. With a tired sigh, the examiner addressed the crowd, announcing that the exam would continue despite the disruption. He confirmed that number 17, Ellie, had passed outright for breaking the barrier, while the remaining candidates would face another test. Ellie barely heard the announcement. Her eyes were fixed on the dark passage, where K was being led away. The scene shifted to an industrial zone. Red stood beside a vehicle with K, while the blue-haired investigator waited silently in the driver's seat. Red told her to stay put. K glanced around, and his blood ran cold. Before him stretched a field of shattered ground and ruined structures. He recognized it instantly. This was the place where he had been thrown into the ink waste. Red surveyed the wreckage with a grim expression, commenting that it was an eyesore. He explained that a serious incident had occurred here. K stiffened as Red continued, stating that for the first time ever, 2 pioneers had been discovered completely drained of their color. Witnesses had even reported the appearance of a massive creature. Turning sharply, Red fixed his gaze on K. He pointed out the timing was far too convenient. A mysterious creature appeared, and shortly after, the first human with black color emerged. Red called it a coincidence, but his glowing eyes said he didn't believe it. He described K's power as something that devoured other colors entirely. This ability, Red stated calmly, doesn't belong to this system at all. K's thoughts spiraled. He realized Red had suspected him from the very beginning. For a fleeting moment, he considered running, but the crushing aura in front of him erased that idea instantly. Escaping a hero was impossible. Then unexpectedly, Red burst out laughing. The tension shattered. He waved dismissively, saying he was only probing K's reaction, though he complained that K's honesty ruined the fun. K stared at him, confused and unsure. Red explained that while the investigation was his official duty, what truly interested him was K himself. Normally, color abilities were absolute. They never mixed, never merged. Yet K's power ignored those rules entirely. Red pointed out that during the second exam, K clearly lacked proper control. K tried to explain, but Red cut him off. Crimson light flared around Red's body as he announced they would conduct a test. K blinked in confusion. Red extended his hand and said he needed first-hand confirmation. Smiling confidently, he challenged K to absorb his power. Panic surged through K as he tried to refuse, warning that it was dangerous. Red only laughed, telling him it was far too early to worry about someone at his level. His tone hardened as he ordered K to stop talking and act. Black was known as the Black Lance, a force that consumed everything without exception. Red understood how dangerous such a power could be. Allowing it to exist unchecked could destabilize the entire Shining City. A darker thought crossed his mind. Few people knew this truth yet, but humanoid creatures existed. If K ever became one or faced one, Red knew he might be forced to act. Feeling the overwhelming pressure radiating from the colorist, K let out a slow breath. Even so, he nodded. Accepting the test, he reached out and grabbed Red's wrist, nervously asking him to promise that if something went wrong, the blame would not fall on him. As he spoke, black energy began to rise from his body once more. The instant their hands connected, the air twisted violently as a shockwave rippled outward. K sucked in a sharp breath as scorching red energy surged straight into his arm, crashing against the black aura surrounding him. His heart sank with immediate regret. Flames detonated from the point of contact, engulfing him completely, and a scream tore from his throat as unbearable heat coursed through his body. He cried out for Red to stop, admitting in panic that he couldn't control it, that it felt like molten lava was flooding his veins. Through the blazing inferno, Red appeared like a towering deity forged entirely from fire, reinforcing why he stood among the city's greatest heroes. Red remained calm within the flames, observing with sharp focus. He quickly realized that K's black energy was continuously devouring his power, acting like something starving beyond restraint. Because the ability was still immature, Red could resist it. but he knew without doubt that an ordinary colorist would have died instantly. As the firestorm roared, Red's curiosity deepened. What Kay had shown during the exam was clearly not the full extent of this power. What truly fascinated him wasn't just absorption, but what happened after the color was taken. The energy spiraled out of control. Red watched as the black aura around Kay's arm began to distort, growing jagged as it fused with the red energy. Then a violent eruption of crimson and darkness exploded outward, forcing Red several steps back. Smoke billowed through the ruins, and from within it emerged a horrifying sight. Kay had partially transformed. The right side of his body was encased in grotesque armor made of condensed red and black energy, shaped into a clawed, demonic form. Red clenched his teeth. The silhouette was unmistakable. Staring at the glowing eye and monstrous limb, he admitted silently that anyone would mistake this form for a creature. At that moment, his suspicion hardened into certainty. Kay had been at the center of the incident where the pioneers lost their color. Kay swayed on his feet, barely conscious. Red shifted his stance, deciding the situation could no longer continue unchecked. He gathered a blazing sphere of fire, preparing to suppress Kay by force before things escalated further. But then Kay let out a low, feral growl. Red froze, sensing resistance, not against him, but against something far deeper. Inside Kay's mind, he stood in an endless void drowned in darkness. Enormous red letters burned across his vision, screaming demands for more color, more energy. The voices howled hungrily, urging him to stop resisting and take everything available. In the real world, Kay gasped and trembled as the whispers clawed at his thoughts. They mocked his restraint, calling it wasteful, insisting he consume it all. Kay screamed back in his mind, ordering them to shut up. With sheer willpower, his remaining eye glowed crimson as he crushed the voices down. He forced the chaotic energy inward, compressing it violently. A shockwave burst outward as the power obeyed. The jagged armor shattered and dissolved into nothing. Silence followed. Kay dropped to one knee, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. Red stared at him with genuine astonishment. Suppressing that level of power alone was something even veteran colorists would struggle to accomplish. Kay's heart hammered wildly as he tried to understand what had just happened. He couldn't believe he'd survived, or that he'd nearly lost himself. Fear crept in as he realized he had gone berserk in front of someone like Red. Steeling himself, he took an unsteady step forward, knowing he needed answers. Red, however, looked thrilled. He laughed, admitting the power Kay absorbed was far stronger than anticipated. Still, he declared the experiment a success, with a grin, because it had been fun. He reminded Kay that anyone aiming for greatness would have to accept danger along the way. Red then waved his hand, saying the test was over. But after a pause, his tone shifted. He reminded Kay that he was the investigator assigned to the destruction of this very district. With a calm yet chilling smile, he pointed out that Kay fit the profile of the culprit perfectly. Kay's blood ran cold. Red explained further. Witnesses had seen a massive shadow creature, and interest in the case ran far deeper than Kay realized. Once word spread about a human wielding black power, suspicion would fall naturally on him. Red gestured toward the ruined landscape, noting the damage would cost hundreds of millions to repair. If the city deemed Kay too dangerous, exile, or worse, would be inevitable. Kay clenched his fists, frustration burning in his chest. He knew the truth didn't matter if he couldn't prove it. Then Red offered a way out. If Kay agreed to operate under his command, Red said, he might be able to intervene. Kay didn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. He bowed deeply, nearly folding in half, loudly declaring that he placed himself entirely under Red's authority. Red raised a hand, telling him to listen first. He clarified that protection wouldn't come free. In exchange, Kay would owe him favors in the future. He asked calmly if Kay believed he could handle that. Kay forced a trembling smile. Inside, he screamed that anything was better than prison, debt, or becoming a test subject. Without hesitation, he agreed, promising to do whatever Red required. In the bleak wasteland, a tiny creature trembled as a massive wheel crashed down beside it, missing by mere inches while a heavily armored transport thundered past. The vehicle pushed through the fog-filled terrain of the Black Lands, its engine roaring against the dead silence. Inside the truck, Kay stared out through the reinforced window, realizing this was the farthest he had ever traveled. For the first time, it truly felt like he had stepped onto the path of a pioneer. His thoughts were abruptly cut short by a hostile glare. Gale, his green hair bristling with irritation, shot Kay a sharp look and sneered, calling him black-haired one. He snapped that Kay was annoying and told him to shut up, even though Kay hadn't said a single word. Kay blinked in confusion, unsure how he had provoked him. The transport bay felt suffocating. Kay shifted awkwardly, thinking that starting his pioneer career immediately should have felt exciting, yet the tension in the air was unmistakable. He glanced at Gale, seething with rage, and then at Ellie Cyan, who sat silently with a cold expression. A quiet doubt crept into his mind. Was joining this team really a good idea? His thoughts drifted back to the day before. Red had asked him if he was prepared to join the exploration mission, explaining that he needed Kay to head toward a specific location in an unexplored zone. When Kay hesitated, Red laughed easily and told him not to overthink it. He showed Kay a map and reassured him that he wouldn't be alone. Other recruits who passed the exam would be deployed nearby, and the official route would be announced soon. Kay's only task was to arrive on time. Returning to the present, Kay noticed that everyone was already seated in the transport. Because Red's involvement had disrupted the original exam, the candidates were given another opportunity. After additional rigorous testing, many skilled participants, including Gale, had passed. Ellie Cyan, the highest-ranked rookie, had joined Red's squad by her own request. Gale's eyes burned as he stared at Kay. The memory of his humiliation still gnawed at him. He convinced himself that his defeat was nothing more than a momentary lapse and swore it would never happen again. He muttered a threat under his breath, warning Kay to be ready once the exploration was over, adding bitterly that if Raven hadn't been present, Kay would already be dead. Ellie Cyan cut in coldly, telling Gale to stop embarrassing himself. She mocked him, saying he would probably go down in one hit again. Gale snapped back furiously, demanding to know what she meant. Ellie brushed him off without looking at him, stating flatly that Gale was no match for Kay. Kay turned toward Ellie with surprise and a faint sense of relief, thinking she might be someone reasonable. That hope vanished instantly. Ellie's sharp gaze shifted to him as she mentioned a past agreement in a tone that made no sense to him. She told him bluntly that the loser should stay quiet and follow orders. Kay stood there, completely baffled, caught between two openly hostile teammates. Letting out a quiet sigh, he realized managing this team would not be easy. The transport eventually crossed the dark waters of the wasteland and approached a distant facility. It rolled into a busy loading dock where workers hurried about with supplies. Once disembarked, Kay, Ellie, Gale, and the other recruits stepped into the forward base of the Dawn Pioneering Corps. Kay looked around in awe at the scale of operations. The sheer volume of resources made him realize just how different an S-rank corps was from his solitary ventures into the Black Lands. Without warning, someone poked Kay in the cheek. He turned to find Mari smiling brightly at him. She explained cheerfully that since this was his first mission, she insisted on coming along to support him. Opening her jacket, she revealed Nero had come too. Kay gently took the black cat, thanking Mari for looking after him. She smiled warmly, saying Nero was family, and added that she had been given a chance to join the expedition as support staff since her skills were valuable here. A loud announcement echoed across the base, calling everyone to assemble. As the pioneers gathered in the gray wasteland, the speaker announced that they would soon enter the Black Lands. Kay handed Nero back to Mari, asking her to take care of him. She warned him not to do anything reckless, and Kay smiled, promising he would come back safely. Mari hugged Nero tightly, but suddenly the cat slipped free from her arms. She gasped as Nero sprinted toward Kay and melted straight into the shadow at his feet. Mari froze, her eyes wide in disbelief. She stammered Kay's name, unable to understand what she had just seen. The group soon arrived at a heavily fortified cave entrance. At the front stood a woman with bright orange hair wearing a white coat. She shouted orders, announcing that a new batch of recruits was about to enter the Black Lands. She stressed that safety was the highest priority and warned that reconnaissance teams had detected unknown dangerous creatures in Area 21, a highly risky zone where the remains of an A-rank creature had recently been discovered. A male pioneer rushed up to her, calling her Arancia. Nervously, he reported that the Red Team leader had brought the new recruits but had already broken formation without authorization. Arancia's eyes widened as she demanded confirmation. When the messenger nodded, she let out a weary sigh and muttered that man is causing trouble again. The group quietly slipped into a narrow canyon, deliberately breaking away from the main force. Colorless Red moved at the front, extending his hand into the darkness as if parting the shadows themselves. The small unit, Kay, Gale, Ellie Cyan, and Red, fully separated from the larger formation. Kay glanced back uneasily and asked if this was really acceptable, pointing out that the main army was heading in a completely different direction. Red replied calmly that their objective was elsewhere. Kay's unease deepened as he looked at Gale and Ellie, realizing the entire squad consisted of fresh recruits. Gale suddenly exploded in anger, demanding to know why he and Ellie were dragged along. He shouted that he had heard Red originally planned to bring only Kay, and he clearly felt insulted by being treated as an afterthought. Red merely smiled, his red aura flickering faintly as he explained that his personal guidance was not something handed out lightly. Allowing only Kay to receive it would be unfair. He added that while he had no intention of babysitting them, he also would not allow them to suffer serious harm. With that, he cut off the argument and ordered them to move. Not long after, Kay's eyes widened as hostile presences emerged. Deep within the cavern, shadowy creatures closed in from every direction. Red raised a lantern, illuminating the chaos as Kay, Gale, and Ellie were forced into battle. A massive wolf-like beast burst out of the darkness. Ellie Cyan reacted instantly, her blue energy blade piercing straight through the creature's body. She landed smoothly, her expression tightening as she fully grasped what fighting in the Black Lands truly meant. Surrounded by countless glowing eyes and endless pressure, she realized this was nothing like training. Tightening her grip on her sword, she resolved to control her stamina carefully. Casting a glance toward Kay, she silently vowed not to fall behind him. At the same time, Kay seized a shadow creature by the throat and crushed it effortlessly with his bare hand. Ellie Cyan froze in disbelief. She demanded to know why Kay wasn't using a dropper. Kay hesitated before admitting that he didn't own one. He explained they were far too expensive and added that he felt fine fighting without it. Ellie stared at him as if he had said something impossible. Gale reacted even more violently, shouting that it made absolutely no sense for a pioneer to have never used a dropper. Droppers were essential tools for pioneers, designed to infuse weapons with color energy in order to properly combat creatures. Without coloring a target, defeating such monsters should have been impossible. Yet there Kay stood, surrounded by fallen enemies, having crushed them with nothing but his hands. The contradiction left both Ellie and Gale shaken. Gale's grip tightened around his weapon as his hand trembled. The memory of the exam resurfaced, the humiliation of realizing he couldn't even injure someone who wasn't using a dropper. His frustration twisted into hatred as he stared at Kay's back, silently swearing that one day he would personally crush him. As they pressed deeper into the cave, Red continued leading with the lantern while Gale followed behind, simmering with rage. Red glanced back at the group, a faint smirk forming on his face. Watching two geniuses being pushed forward by a rookie wasn't a bad sight at all. His smile widened as he thought to himself that things were only going to become more interesting. In a relaxed tone, he urged them onward, saying they were almost at their destination, and suggesting they wrap things up quickly so they could celebrate afterward. After the clash with the shadow beasts, the remains of wolf-like creatures were scattered across the canyon floor. Colorist Red called for a short 10-minute rest, but he made it clear to Gale, Kay, and Ellie Cyan that this was only a pause and that the true objective still lay ahead. Gale let out an annoyed sigh, complaining that he had already burned through a large portion of his color. He took out a small vial filled with glowing green liquid and drank it without hesitation. Kay immediately recognized it as personal ink, an extremely refined alchemical substance used by pioneers to restore their color reserves. Because each bottle had to be customized to match the user's specific color, it was absurdly expensive. Kay watched silently as both Gale and Ellie replenished themselves, unable to hide a trace of envy. He briefly wished he could afford something like that, but quickly pushed the thought aside. Instead, he walked away from the group and approached the corpse of a fallen shadow creature. Reaching out, he activated his ability. Black energy surged violently from the body, spiraling into his palm as the shadow was absorbed directly into him. The dark power flowed through his veins, and Kay clenched his fist, feeling his strength fully return. He casually announced that he was back to full condition. When he turned around, he found Gale and Ellie staring at him in disbelief. Ellie cautiously asked whether he was truly fine. Kay waved off her concern, saying he had done this before. Gale, however, nearly shouted, unable to believe Kay had just absorbed a monster so effortlessly. Before the conversation could continue, Red cut in, stating that the break was over. The group moved deeper into the canyon until Red suddenly stopped and announced they had arrived. Ahead of them stood an enormous dome of swirling black energy, completely blocking the path. Kay stared at it and muttered that it looked like a massive black curtain. Red smiled at Kay's reaction and explained that this barrier was the very reason he had brought him along. To prove his point, Red condensed red energy into his palm and fired a powerful beam straight at the dome. The attack vanished the moment it touched the surface, swallowed entirely by the darkness. Red explained that any attempt to break the barrier by force only fed it, making it stronger. He pointed out the similarity to Kay's own ability and said he had suspected Kay would be the only one capable of removing it. Gesturing toward the wall, Red revealed that the path to the ruins lay beyond it, and that their true target, the Stella fragment, was hidden inside. Kay's eyes widened. Gale frowned, asking what a Stella even was, while Ellie admitted she had never heard of it. Red calmly assured them it was real and that the Shining City was desperate to obtain it. Then he turned to Kay and ordered him to erase the curtain. Stepping forward, Kay placed his hand against the wall of darkness. Instantly, his absorption ability activated. The black energy of the barrier surged violently into his arm, forming a massive vortex as the enormous dome began collapsing inward. Red, Gale, and Ellie watched as the obstruction was steadily devoured. Red's grin widened, satisfied that his gamble had paid off. As the barrier vanished, he remarked that Kay's power would be invaluable. Kay, however, looked anything but pleased. Sweat poured down his face as his body trembled under the strain of containing such an overwhelming amount of energy. Without warning, the ground began to quake. Gale and Ellie stiffened as the vibrations intensified, realizing the disturbance would draw monsters from all directions. The roar of collapsing energy echoed through the canyon, and moments later, black wolf-like creatures poured out from the cliffs. The group was surrounded. Ellie and Gale immediately drew their weapons, while Red laughed, commenting that they had quite the enthusiastic welcome. Red ordered Gale and Ellie to deal with the incoming enemies while Kay focused on finishing the absorption. His tone was cold and decisive as he commanded them to eliminate every creature. Gale moved first, his wind-infused strikes tearing through the shadows with blinding speed. Ellie followed, summoning towering ice spikes that erupted from the ground and skewered multiple beasts at once. Red observed calmly, nodding that although he had been ready to intervene, there was no need. With minimal effort, he formed red energy orbs and fired precise beams that pierced through the remaining monsters. Despite being new recruits, their combat ability was clearly up to standard. Meanwhile, Kay remained kneeling near the remnants of the barrier, sweat dripping as he struggled to stabilize the volatile energy flooding his body. Red watched with a satisfied smile, thinking how convenient it was to let his subordinates handle the dirty work. Kay sensed something unsettling. The power of the curtain felt disturbingly similar to his own. He realized the danger immediately. If his concentration slipped, the energy could reverse and drain his color instead. Gritting his teeth, Kay refused to yield, declaring silently that he would not be overpowered. With one last push of will, the absorption finally ended. Kay staggered to the edge of the newly cleared path, his breathing ragged as sweat streamed down his face. He confirmed aloud that the curtain's energy had been completely consumed. When he looked ahead, his heart sank. Beyond where the barrier once stood was not a corridor or chamber, but a colossal void, a bottomless pit of absolute darkness. Peering into it sent a chill through his spine. He wondered if this endless abyss was truly the entrance to the ruins. Regaining his composure, he turned back and reported to the team leader that the curtain had been successfully removed. Red nodded in approval, openly praising Kay for completing the task. He raised his voice, informing the others that the obstruction was gone and ordering them to finish off the remaining enemies. Without warning, Red's expression hardened. His instincts screamed danger. In a blur of motion, he lunged forward and seized both Ellie and Gale, yanking them backward with overwhelming force. A split second later, an unseen slash tore through the space they had just occupied. The invisible attack carved deep trenches into the canyon floor and obliterated the last of the shadow beasts. Rocks and dust rained down as Red landed safely on higher ground with Ellie and Gale in tow. Gale stared at the destruction in stunned silence, fully aware that he would have died instantly if Red had reacted any slower. Red exhaled grimly, realizing the earlier lack of resistance had a reason. Something far more terrifying had been driving the monsters away. He recalled intelligence reports warning of a powerful entity roaming nearby. As the dust settled, a lone figure emerged from the haze, walking toward them while dragging a massive blade along the ground. Red muttered that there was no longer any time to waste. The stranger stepped into view. His hair was split in color, white on one side, black on the other. Half of his face was covered by a dark, mask-like growth that looked fused to his flesh, and numerous weapons were strapped across his back. A suffocating pressure radiated from him as his cold gaze locked onto the pioneers. Red immediately positioned himself between the threat and his team. He barked orders, telling Kay and the others to listen carefully. Shoving a lantern into Kay's hands, Red issued a rapid command. They were to enter the ruins at once and secure the Stella fragment. Kay's eyes widened in alarm as he asked if Red seriously expected them to go down there alone. Red answered without hesitation, stating that their abilities were more than sufficient. Before anyone could object, Red released a violent burst of force. Kay, Ellie, and Gale were shoved toward the abyss as Red shouted at them to stop hesitating and move. Kay cried out Red's name as the three recruits plunged into the darkness below. Left behind, Red stood at the edge of the pit, his red aura blazing fiercely. One of the recruits, voices echoed faintly from the depths, asking what they were supposed to do on their own. Behind Red, the armed stranger closed in. The two powerful figures locked eyes in a silent confrontation, and Red knew the coming fight would be anything but simple. Far below, in the depths of the abyss, Kay lay sprawled on the ground. He groaned as pain shot through his body, clutching his head while struggling to rise in the oppressive darkness. Remembering the lantern Red had given him, he activated it, wondering if this was truly the ruins. Light burst forth. Kay froze. Instead of ancient stone halls, the lantern revealed the skeletal remains of enormous modern skyscrapers, shattered concrete structures, and collapsed roads stretching endlessly into the darkness. It looked like an entire city had been destroyed and buried beneath the earth. Standing on a narrow ledge, Kay lifted the lantern higher, illuminating more of the ruin. Words failed him as he stared at the underground graveyard of a modern metropolis. Kay stared at the underground city in disbelief. He muttered that a place like this shouldn't exist, then complained that the darkness made it impossible to see properly. Almost immediately, a familiar voice snapped at him to stop whining and move toward the light. Relief washed over him when he spotted Gale and Ellie nearby. He admitted honestly that he had been scared of being separated. Gale clicked his tongue and blamed Kay for dragging them into confusion, but Ellie cut him off sharply, saying he had been just as lost as anyone else. Gale scanned the endless ruins uneasily, asking what kind of place this even was. Anxiety crept into his voice as he pointed out how ridiculous it sounded to search for something called a Stella fragment in a city that stretched on forever. Kay nodded, agreeing that without any clue of what they were looking for, wandering around like this could take days, or worse. Deep down, Kay wished Nero were with him. Almost as if responding to his thoughts, a faint glow appeared near his feet. Kay's eyes widened when he saw the small black cat standing there. Panic struck him instantly as he wondered how Nero had managed to follow them down here. Ellie noticed the animal and asked cautiously if it was a creature. Kay felt cold sweat trickle down his back, fearing he had finally been exposed. Then he steadied himself. Instead of hiding, he decided this might be the perfect chance to show Nero's true value. Calling out to the others, Kay lifted the cat with confidence and announced that he actually had a reliable way to locate the Stella fragment. Gale immediately exploded in anger, calling it nonsense, but Ellie ignored him entirely. Her attention was completely captured by the cat. Before Kay could explain further, Nero let out a soft cry and sprang free. The moment it leapt into the air, its body dissolved into a swirling mass of light. A brilliant glow flooded the ruins, forcing all three of them to shield their eyes. The light then shot forward, forming a clear path through the darkness. They followed the glowing trail as it wound between shattered buildings. Gale muttered in disbelief, questioning how a creature could show intelligence on this level and demanding to know where Kay had found it. Kay ignored him, focusing instead on interpreting Nero's movements. He calmly stated that the Stella fragment was close, right ahead. The glowing shape suddenly darted away, racing toward a massive concrete structure. A dark tunnel yawned open at its base. Kay stared into it uneasily, wondering how far down they would need to go. Gale mocked him, asking if he was scared already. Kay shot back without hesitation and said they were going in. Inside, the corridor stretched wide and tall, with the faint glow of Nero lighting the way. Kay remarked that the facility was far larger than he had imagined. Suddenly, Nero stopped in front of a massive metal door, hovering there insistently. Kay realized it must have found something important. The silence was shattered by a thunderous metallic impact. A colossal mechanical foot slammed down in front of them. All three froze as a towering, rust-covered automaton rose into view. Gale frowned, nodding that this thing was nothing like the biological creatures they usually fought. A beam of light swept out from the machine, scanning Ellie first. Symbols appeared, identifying her blue color. The scanner moved to Gale next, registering green. Finally, the light fell on Kay. His heart sank as he realized it was analyzing their colors. The scan completed. The display changed, identifying absolute pitch black. Instantly, the automaton's eye flared brightly. In a distorted mechanical voice, it announced that it had detected the color of the Black Witch and classified Kay as a high-level threat. Elimination procedures began. Kay barely had time to react before a massive metal fist crashed toward him. The blow sent him skidding backward across the floor. Pain shot through his body, but he managed to block the worst of it. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself upright and glared at the machine. Shouting in anger and defiance, Kay declared that if the automaton wanted a fight, then he would not hold anything back. The towering automaton slowly lifted its enormous arm, metal joints groaning as it prepared to crush everything in its path. Kay rushed forward first, slamming his fist into the machine's forearm. Pain shot through his arm instantly, forcing him back. The impact barely dented the surface, and he realized with shock just how absurdly durable the armor was. Gale stared in disbelief as the robot pulled its arm back, readying another devastating strike. Ellie reacted quickly, darting in and thrusting her rapier toward the machine's torso. The blade struck true, but instead of cutting through, it bounced off with a shower of sparks. Ellie froze, staring at her weapon in disbelief. Not even a scratch remained on the metal surface. Panic flickered across her face as the terrifying thought set in that her color might be useless against something mechanical. While they struggled, Kay forced himself to stay calm and observe. His eyes locked onto the faint glow pulsing from the robot's chest. Inside the transparent casing, liquid energy churned violently. He understood immediately that was its core. Kay lunged again, aiming straight for the weak point. But the machine moved far faster than expected. Its arm swung sideways like a massive club, forcing Kay to twist his body mid-step and narrowly avoid being crushed. He skidded backward, breathing hard, frustration burning in his chest. Normal attacks weren't going to work. Then he remembered the sensation from before, the time his body had been consumed by black energy. Fully transforming again was too dangerous. The cost was too high. Instead, he made a decision. Kay drew in a deep breath and focused everything he had into his right arm alone. Dark energy condensed rapidly, wrapping his fist in a dense, pitch-black layer that pulsed like a living thing. The pressure was immense, but he held it together. With a sharp shout, Kay launched himself into the air. His empowered punch struck the robot dead center in its chest. The black-coated fist pierced straight through the armor and smashed into the glowing core. A violent shockwave erupted outward as the core shattered, sending fragments flying. The automaton's upper body exploded apart, its head tearing free and crashing to the ground as the light in its eye flickered and died. Silence fell. Kay landed heavily among the wreckage, breathing hard, then slowly let out a shaky sigh of relief. Gale and Ellie could only stare, speechless. As the dust settled, Kay noticed a spherical object rolling near his feet. He picked it up, realizing it was the broken core. He smiled faintly, thinking Mari would probably love something like this. His relief didn't last long. Gale suddenly shouted, demanding to know what that power was. He and Ellie closed in on Kay, firing questions at him non-stop. Kay stiffened, sweat forming on his brow, and awkwardly brushed it off by saying the technique consumed a huge amount of his color and wasn't something he could use freely. Before anyone could press further, a deep mechanical rumble echoed behind them. The massive metal door they had been standing near began to open on its own. Beyond it stretched an endless darkness, so deep it seemed to swallow light itself. Without warning, Nero shot out from the void, crying out anxiously. The cat hovered near Kay, trembling, clearly terrified. Kay followed Nero's gaze toward the doorway, an uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. He admitted he couldn't see anything inside, but stepped closer anyway. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the darkness rippled like liquid. Then everything exploded. Thick tendrils of shadow burst outward from the doorway, wrapping around all three of them. Gale and Ellie screamed as they were yanked forward, unable to resist the overwhelming force. Kay reached out instinctively, but it was useless. The darkness swallowed them whole. They fell, endlessly. When they finally hit the ground, Gale groaned loudly, cursing the fall and the suffocating blackness. He pushed himself up, rubbing his chest, then froze. His hands trembled as he stared down at himself. The vibrant green that once defined his power was gone. His jacket, his body, even his hands were now drained of all color, reduced to dull shades of black, white, and gray. Panic seized him as he grabbed at his chest in disbelief. Kay and Ellie stood beside him, equally horrified. The world around them had lost its color entirely. They stood in a lifeless monochrome space, surrounded by silence, staring at their own drained bodies, terrified and confused, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Far from the buried ruins, a lone scorpion crawled across the wasteland, its tiny shadow stretching beneath the distant glow of the shining city. Within the city's walls stood the Eastern Government Office. Inside, the chief slammed his desk in fury, demanding to know whether Kay had been found yet. A trembling subordinate reported that the boy was currently on an exploration mission under the supervision of Colorless Red. He added carefully that Kay himself had requested that the authorities not interfere. The chief exploded in anger at the mention of black. He roared that allowing someone with such a dangerous color into the field was madness. Even if Red was a celebrated hero, this crossed a line. He ranted that recent creature sightings had already thrown the ruling council into panic, with whispers spreading that the catastrophic black wave might be starting again. If things went wrong, he knew the blame would fall squarely on him. As he raged, a woman with pink and yellow hair lounged nearby, smiling lazily. Chamalea, the leader of the Dawn Pioneering Corps, teased him for getting worked up again and warned that his blood pressure would land him in a hospital bed someday. She told him to calm down. Red, she argued, was not reckless. If anyone could keep an eye on a dangerous variable, it was him. Chamalea added that taking a risk like this could lead to unexpected gains. Stirring her tea, she remarked that trust mattered more than fear right now, though she grimaced at the bitter taste. The chief ignored her and dumped an absurd amount of sugar into the pot, muttering about how anyone could drink it otherwise. He snapped at her to focus. Chamalea's playful expression faded as she acknowledged the real issue. Black was feared because of the legend of the Black Witch. That color symbolized death, despair, and the first black wave, a catastrophe that nearly wiped humanity out. She reminded him how the world had once drowned in darkness, how creatures had flooded the land, and how the Black Lands were born. Another wave, she said quietly, was inevitable someday. With recent anomalies and the emergence of a Black Wielder, the situation could no longer be ignored. If humanity wanted to survive, they would need every possible strength, even black. She urged the chief to convince the council. The chief exhaled heavily, admitting it would not be easy. Still, as he stared at a dossier containing Kay's photograph, he murmured that perhaps the fate of the city truly did rest on that boy's shoulders. Meanwhile, in a boundless void of darkness, three figures stood outlined in faint white light. Kay, Gale, and Ellie stared around in confusion, unable to tell where they were. Panic overtook Gale as he pointed at his own body, screaming that his color was gone. He demanded to know why Kay still seemed unaffected. Kay replied flatly that he had no idea, suggesting it might be because his color was black, identical to the space around them. Gale suddenly doubled over drained, while Ellie clutched her head as weakness washed through her. Kay watched in confusion. He felt completely fine. Slowly, he realized why. He had lived most of his life without color. This emptiness felt familiar to him. Gale muttered that something strange was happening inside his body. Squinting, he noticed a faint glow pulsing within his chest, like a hidden core. A chorus of whispers flooded the void. The three froze. Gale shouted into the darkness, demanding whoever was there reveal themselves. Kay listened carefully. The voices felt wrong, different from the one that usually haunted him. From the shadows, a woman's silhouette emerged. Her long hair flowed unnaturally, and her form looked neither fully solid nor entirely unreal. Kay sensed her presence instantly and turned. Gale and Ellie stood frozen, terror-stricken. She had appeared without warning. Slowly, the figure raised her hand and pointed directly at Kay. His vision shattered. Kay was dragged into a violent storm of images. He saw a city being swallowed by a spiraling vortex of power. The world bled red as towering monsters rampaged through ruined streets. A colossal eye opened in the sky, gazing down upon an army of shadow beasts. Among them loomed a horrifying, many-eyed entity. Then the woman's face filled his vision, one eye glowing as she stared straight into his soul. He found himself before an overwhelming sea of blue energy. Memory and reality blurred together. Deep within his mind, a voice from a brilliant light told him he needed a name. A smiling figure from his past appeared, gently calling him K and urging him to find his own color, his own light. The vision collapsed. K snapped back to reality with a sharp gasp, sweat pouring down his face. He staggered, clutching his head as the afterimages burned into his mind. He cursed under his breath, unable to understand why such horrific memories were surfacing now. Desperate, he tried to hold on to the fragments before they faded. One name echoed clearly in his thoughts. Lumiel. Kay frowned in confusion, whispering the name aloud, unsure of who or what it belonged to. Gale suddenly snaps. Losing all restraint, the swordsman screams into the darkness and swings his blade wildly, as if fighting enemies only he can see. Kay turns in alarm and realizes Gale's attacks are coming dangerously close to Ellie Cyan, who is crouched on the ground in terror. Gale shouts incoherently, completely detached from reality, while Ellie trembles and begs him to stop. Her pleas are ignored. His eyes have turned pitch black, blood leaking from their corners as the void drives him into madness. Ellie is no better. She clutches her head as black tears stream down her face, whispering apologies to her sister while reliving a painful memory. Kay watches the scene unfold, his expression darkening. He understands now, the space itself is attacking their minds. If they stay any longer, both of them will be lost. Just then, a familiar chirping sound cuts through the chaos. Kay looks up and sees a glowing white figure racing toward him. Relief washes over his face as he recognizes Nero. He quickly checks if the cat is unharmed. Nero circles him urgently before pointing toward the distance, clearly trying to guide him somewhere. Understanding the signal, Kay prepares to follow. Then he stops. Gale is still rampaging and Ellie is barely conscious. Kay clenches his fists. He cannot abandon them. Turning to Nero, he asks for help. In response, a brilliant wave of purifying light bursts outward from the cat, engulfing both Gale and Ellie. The black corruption evaporates under the glow. Gale's screams fade, his sword dropping from his hand, while Ellie's trembling subsides as the darkness drains away. Kay exhales in relief. He tells them to stay where they are and turns back toward Nero, deciding to scout ahead alone. He follows the trail of light through the endless darkness, growing irritated as nothing seems to change. As if mocking him, the whispering returns. A voice murmurs that no color can reach this place. Kay clicks his tongue in annoyance, muttering that riddles are the worst. Then he sees it. A distant star-like glow pierces the void. Kay's irritation vanishes as excitement takes over. He breaks into a run, and as he approaches, his breath catches. Before him stands a massive stone structure, crowned by a four-pointed star radiating holy light. There is no doubt in his mind, this is the Stella fragment. He notices that its shape and glow are unlike anything he imagined, wondering briefly if each fragment is different. Not wanting to waste time, he climbs the rocky base and reaches out. The moment his fingers touch it, the fragment reacts violently. Energy surges into his hand as his absorption ability activates on its own. Kay gasps, his body glowing as power floods him. Panic flashes through his mind. He never intended to absorb it. He prays the contact is brief enough not to cause problems. As the energy settles, the oppressive darkness collapses. The void peels away, revealing a vast chamber of gray stone. Kay stands alone at the center, staring at the light swirling in his hands. The black space is gone. He lets out a slow breath, reminding himself that the Black Lands never play by the rules. Behind him, Gale and Ellie regain consciousness. They stare at Kay as if he is a monster. Kay asks if they are all right, but Gale only points at him in accusation, while Ellie demands to know how he remained unaffected. Kay answers honestly, he doesn't know. He raises his hand and shows them the object. The swirling, multicolored light confirms it. This is the Stella fragment. The three gather around it. Gale scoffs, unable to believe something so small caused so much trouble. Ellie, however, is awestruck, sensing countless colors within it. Nearby, Nero floats silently, staring at the fragment with intense focus. Kay checks himself and confirms he feels fine, but Nero drifts closer, eyes locked on the glowing energy. Before anyone can react, the cat opens his mouth wide and swallows the Stella fragment whole. Time freezes. Kay's face twists in pure horror. Gale and Ellie scream at the same time, panic flooding their voices as they stare at Nero. demanding to know what kind of creature he really is. Gale lost his temper completely. Floating in midair, the black cat was scolded mercilessly as Gale shouted that the fragment was not food. In a fit of rage, he grabbed Nero and shook him violently, screaming for the creature to spit it out. Kay reacted instantly, shouting at Gale to let go of the cat and lunging to pull him away. Before the argument could escalate further, a sharp cracking sound echoed around them. Thin fractures spread rapidly across the walls and ceiling. Gale cursed bitterly, realizing that after everything they had gone through, the place was collapsing on top of them. The chamber began to cave in as chunks of stone rained down. Seeing the danger, Gale yelled for everyone to move. Kay clutched Nero tightly and ran alongside Ellie as the structure behind them crumbled. They barely made it into the corridor, escaping just as the room collapsed entirely. Elsewhere, a separate group of pioneers stood before the corpse of an enormous monster. Arancia, the orange-haired leader, crouched near the battlefield, examining a deep gouge carved into the ground. Her expression darkened as she traced the mark with her eyes. A blue-haired subordinate asked if she had found something troubling. Rising to her feet, Arancia confirmed grimly that the battle-mad lunatic had returned. She explained that the traces belonged to a humanoid monster known as the Sword Demon, one of the Black Witch's infamous hands. Every time it appeared, destruction followed. She suspected the recent surge in monster activity was no coincidence. When asked whether they should proceed, Arancia shook her head and ordered an immediate withdrawal. They had already secured enough materials, and she refused to gamble with the lives of the probationary pioneers. At that moment, a terrifying wave of power erupted nearby. A colossal explosion of crimson fire lit up a distant mountain. Arancia froze, instantly recognizing the color of the flames. Her eyes widened in shock. Only one person wielded fire like that. If Red was using such force, then the Sword Demon had to be there. Invisible slashes suddenly tore through the air toward her team. Arancia reacted without hesitation, shouting for everyone to scatter as a massive cutting wave surged forward. Drawing her oversized mechanical hammer, now glowing with molten orange light, she leapt into the air. With a fierce roar, she brought the hammer down. The collision between orange and black energy detonated in a violent explosion, completely canceling the attack. Landing steadily, Arancia ordered a full retreat. She instructed her deputy to escort the team back to the outpost, while she personally went to rendezvous with Red. In the next instant, she launched herself toward the blazing mountain. At the mountain peak, a cataclysmic duel was unfolding. Red and black energies clashed relentlessly as Colorless Red, and the Sword Demon moved faster than the eye could follow. Their weapons collided again and again, filling the air with shockwaves. The demon conjured a massive spear of darkness, its single white eye burning with hostility, and hurled it forward. Red blocked the attack head-on, twisting his body to redirect the force. The Sword Demon pressed on, swinging a blade of shadows in a relentless assault, while Red focused entirely on defense. Suddenly, the demon sensed danger. The ground erupted beneath him as a towering pillar of red flame burst upward. He leapt away just in time, avoiding the inferno. Through the roaring flames, his eye remained locked on Red. Then a voice rang out from above, mocking Red for relying on bait tactics. Arancia descended like a meteor, her hammer raised high. Laughing wildly, she challenged the demon to dodge. Her hammer slammed down with overwhelming force, unleashing a devastating orange shockwave that crushed the demon into the earth. As the dust settled, Arancia landed lightly. Red greeted her calmly, remarking that she was late. She joked that she nearly died getting there, but he brushed it off. She admitted that even her strike hadn't been enough to finish the job. Right on cue, the Sword Demon rose from the rubble, completely unharmed, glaring at them with murderous intent. Red remained confident, stating that fighting would be easier now that Arancia was fully using her color. She snapped back, warning him not to hold back, and adding that none of the other colorists wanted to witness his true power. Red complained about her nagging, but she ignored him, activating her ability as glowing orange rings formed beneath her feet. Gripping her hammer, she declared they would bring down another of the witch's black hands. Across from them, the Sword Demon stood silently, fury swelling beneath his mask. Then, unexpectedly, strained voices echoed from a nearby cliff. Red's eyes widened, and even the demon paused in confusion. From above, Gale emerged over the ledge with Kay, Ellie, and Nero. Gale collapsed immediately, gasping that he never wanted to return to the underground ruins. Kay froze, a suffocating presence washed over him. He looked up and locked eyes with the Sword Demon. Behind the monster, Red and Arancia stood glowing with power. Realizing they had stumbled into an active battlefield, Kay's blood ran cold. Red and Arancia cursed under their breath and rushed forward, shouting for the trio to get out of the way. The sword demon ignored them, his gaze fixed on the weakest targets. In an instant, he charged straight at Kay, Gale, and Ellie. Acting on instinct, Gale raised his sword and Ellie drew her weapon despite their exhaustion. The demon swung once. Both weapons shattered instantly, reduced to fragments. Gale stared in disbelief as his reinforced blade broke like glass. Terror seized him. This was an enemy far beyond them. The sword demon raised his weapon again. A blade of white energy tore through the air. Without thinking, Kay threw himself forward, shielding his teammates. The slash came down cleanly, severing his left hand. Pain exploded through his body as he collapsed backward. Ellie screamed his name, and Gale shouted in horror. The demon pressed the advantage. He slammed his knee into Gale, sending him crashing aside, then seized Ellie by the throat and lifted her off the ground, using her as a shield. Red and Arancia arrived too late to intervene. The sword demon ordered them to stop, demanding a clear path and warning that he would kill the girl if they followed. He demanded they hand over the key, leaving the colorist stunned. Arancia roared in fury, demanding to know what he was talking about, while Red narrowed his eyes, weighing the situation carefully. Nearby, Kay lay face down in a pool of blood. Nero hovered above him, crying out desperately. Then Kay's remaining hand twitched. Slowly, he began to rise. A chilling pressure spread across the battlefield. The sword demon felt it and turned sharply, confusion flashing across his face. He stared at Kay's silhouette, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Black energy surged violently around Kay's body. The darkness condensed around his severed wrist, and before anyone could react, a new arm formed, entirely composed of writhing black power. Kay stood fully upright, his face hidden in shadow, radiating an overwhelming aura that made even the sword demon hesitate.